Hello, students. Give me a moment and I will pull up our lecture for today. So bear with me as I get to the right screens. Um, Welcome to the next class in individuals and families. Today, we're going to talk about and spend some time kind of digging into this whole notion of developing goals and formulating contracts. So the very important concept of social work planning. So if you're following along now in the journal intervention model, we are at the place of intervention where we are looking at planning and we're looking at implementing actual services to put in place to look at modifying and changing behavior for our clients. So without any further ado, let's just kind of jump into where we need to go. So let me go back one more here. All right, so goals. The purpose and function of goals. So when you have goals that you establish with your client, so you've done your engagement, you've done your assessment, and you've gotten a good sense from the family or the individual what the issues are that are wreaking havoc in their lives, then we're really trying to look at, so what do we want to be different? And so the goals give us a targeted way to look at what we want to change and how we're going to go about that piece. So the goal planning piece is very, very important. um, so again, the purpose of goals is to really distinguish the program objectives and the client's goals. So what is it that we're actually trying to do? What is it that you as a social worker is helping that client try to do? There's some factors that influence how these goals get developed, and they're here below. And we're looking at, one, we have to have client participation. Sometimes we have clients that are assigned to us involuntarily, which means that they would probably rather not work with us. We also have to look at the influence of values and belief, the values inherent in goal setting, and then family involvement, as well as paying attention to the environmental conditions and resources that clients have access to or where they live. So those things are all important when we think about goals. So we've got a couple of different types. You've got behavioral goals. And so a behavioral goal would be changing a behavior. So if I've got a 7-year-old who is acting out in school, and we want to curtail that behavior, then we'll look at putting in some goals or some tasks in place that actually are directed at changing that particular behavior that we're seeing in class to something that's much more positive. So if I've got a student who is disrupting class 5 or 6 times in a classroom period, then a goal might be to reduce the number of times that this particular child disrupts to maybe once per class period, and then eventually down to none. So behaviorally, we're looking at things being different. Then we also have shared goals. So these are goals that actually are looked at in terms of, if I've got a family that I'm working with, for example, a shared goal might be to look at improving communication in the family system. So in other words, if I come to you, we do some assessment, and we recognize that there are some issues around communication, then a shared goal might be for everybody to be able to learn to practice communicating in a different way. And then a reciprocal goal is one that really actually looks at a give and a take, one that gives back in terms of, this particular goal will have an impact that will continue to give back not only to that client, but also to that family system. So a reciprocal goal might include something like being involved in non-using behavior, because when people are using chemicals, that tends to change the communication and other dynamics in the household. So if I change that dynamic in terms of limiting the use, then the reciprocal piece of that is that it then also responds back to how other things happen in that family system based on this new behavior that's there. So hopefully that will help you think about that a little bit in terms of that. So again, these are some guidelines that we need to be aware of as it relates to selecting and setting goals. Um, so I will pull a few. So first of all, goals need to be defined in explicit and measurable terms. We'll seek mental health services. That's too vague. I don't know what that means. So that means, do I go to the office and say, oh, I found a person who can see me for mental health services, but what am I measuring in terms of that? So they have to be written explicitly in those measurable terms. They have to be feasible. They should be stated in positive terms to emphasize growth. And they should always be consistent with social work practice as well as agency functioning. So just some things to think about as you're thinking about those goals. Here's an example of some goals and tasks. And so when we think about goal is the end result. So think about a goal as like for those of you who watch football or who watch soccer, then you've got goal posts and you've got goal nets at the end of the playing field. And the object is for the team to score the goal. The task, however, is to then be involved in a series of plays that are designed to move the ball or move whatever item you're playing with closer to the point where you can actually score a goal. So if you think about it, a goal and a task in that particular framework, think about the goal as the touchdown or the field goal, and think about the task as the 4 downs that it takes in football to move the football 10 yards per time till you can get closer to the goal until you can eventually score. So these are some examples of some tasks that you need to actually also be a part of. In other words, to help you reach the goal. So the tasks are the stepping stones that you would need to actually complete to actually reach your goal, right? Also understanding the guidelines as it relates to working with minors. We need to also look at people who are teenagers and younger to get an understanding of what their view of the problem actually is. We need to take into consideration whether they're volunteer, whether they're coming on their own because they see that there's a need, or whether they've been commanded by some either law enforcement or some other entity to look at making sure the behavior is different. Also, we have to take into consideration the age and the stage of development as well as cognitive ability. So depending on how old the client is, how mature they are, what their ability level is, that will determine how the goals are actually going to be developed and manifest, as well as explaining exactly what it is in terms of the behavior that we're looking for to change. There's also this negotiation process that needs to happen. So it helps us determine the readiness of our clients in terms of being able to negotiate what those goals are. It explains the function of those goals, negotiating with involuntary clients, jointly selecting appropriate goals. So you do that in conjunction with your client, ranking them in order in terms of what's important to the client, asking the client to specifically submit to those goals, looking at the barriers to goal attainment, those kind of things, as well as explicitly talking about what those goals look like. So I'll give you an example from my practice days about negotiating a goal. So I had a case that came in to Child Protection Services. I had a dad who was actively using cocaine. And so as a result of the cocaine use, he ended up neglecting his children. So when I came out, did my assessment, and we talked about the things that are probably going to need to be different so that child protection can be out of your life and your family can function in a much safer way. We talked about the use. He indicated to me that I don't have a problem with cocaine. I can stop using cocaine at any point in time that I want, and I can pick it up and I can put it down. So I don't have a problem. So I don't necessarily need to do treatment or anything like that. I said, okay, so we do understand that the use of chemicals is part of the issue while we're involved. So we really need to figure out a way to mitigate that. So if you're saying to me that you don't have a problem with chemicals, then we need to be able to demonstrate that in a way that's measurable. So here's what I will suggest to you. I'll offer you this. If you can give me a random UA once, maybe twice a week for the next 90 days, and random means that someone from the UA center will call you. You need to stop everything you're doing, go down, and then actually do a urinalysis test. And if they come back clean for 90 days with random use, then you're right, you don't have a problem with chemicals and we can move on. However, I want to also make sure that we're on top of things. So as a part of the agreement, I would want you to agree that if you missed a UA, you didn't show up, or that one was dirty, then we would say that we do have an issue, and then we would go in for a chemical health assessment, and then we would do treatment. So think about it. We can try it your way, we can try it the other way, with the understanding that if your way doesn't work, we're going to have to revert back to that way. So that's an example of negotiating goals. If the issue is about use ending, then I want to give and hear from the client about what they're able to do in terms of assisting with that. And if they're not successful, then here's a plan B that we can actually back up with. We also have to monitor the progress on those particular goals. So, goals are sometimes time limited. And so, if I'm only working with you for 6 months, then we need to see some movement in terms of the actual goals and tasks that we have in place to make sure that things are moving to a place where things are progressing. So that evaluation is going to be an important piece. We need to look at baseline behaviors, where people were when they started. So there's some different techniques that we utilize to measure, self-administered scales, things of that particular nature. Sometimes just actual observation of clients in their environment, sometimes depending on the goals, can be looked at as a form of measurement as well too. So you got to measure what we're doing to see whether it makes a difference. Here's examples of some self-anchored scales. So, this person obviously has some issues around anxiety. And so this is a way for them to track when they're feeling anxious, what days it's actually happening on, what are the circumstances. So it helps us build some different things to put into place. This is an example of a graph recording that really looks at monitoring the different times of day and the level of anxiety that people experience, so they can chart it to see what their level of progress actually is, and something that we report to the social worker as well. So again, these are measures that we're going to need to look at and make sure that we have some evidence to support whether things are actually working. So contracting is that particular process of really coming up with an agreement, typically called a case plan or a treatment plan. And these are the written agreements that have the goals and the tasks, the length of time, how things are going to get paid for. All of the resources are actually there in terms of what it is we're going to be doing as we're working with this family. So the contracting piece is a very important part of what it is you do. And that brings us to a close as it relates to this week's topic in terms of contracting and actually developing goals. So there'll be a wonderful, fun, exciting video that you'll get a chance to watch in class. And then you'll also get a chance to do some mock contracting and case planning with a family situation that will be shared with you shortly. Take care. See you in class.